Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this short video, we are going to cover a popular React library called Styled Components. And essentially what Styled Components does is it allows us to create React components that have predefined CSS styles within them. So typically what we would have to do if you want to style our React components or our JSX, we would either have inline styles or we would have some sort of external style sheet and then we would link it to a particular element. With styled components, what we can do is create these components and have those components have the styles that we want within them. So it would ultimately look something like this. So over here we have const button. This is what the component is going to be called, button. And then we're going to say equal styled dot and then whatever we want that HTML element to be. So yes, over here we called the component button, but we could have the HTML element to be a div or h1 or whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to match button as well. Over here they're using anchor tag. And then after the HTML element, they have these template literals. And then in here, they define the styles. So over here, we have display, inline block, border radius, all the styles for this particular anchor tag that is basically the button component. So over here, we have all these styles. And then over here, we actually have some dynamic styles that we can inject. So over here, we have some dynamic styles. So this is actually depending on the props, and we'll actually cover that in a bit. But once we create this, then inside of our JSX, we can actually use it right over here. So we can go ahead and just use this. We can essentially render this button component, and that is going to be an anchor tag with all of these styles. And there's a lot of benefits to this. Actually, if you go to the documentation and then you go to the motivations, you can see all of the different benefits that you get from taking this approach. For instance, now we have no class name bugs. One problem that sometimes we have is that, hey, we could create a class name and we can apply it to some sort of HTML element. And then maybe later on in the future, let's say a month from now, we create another class name that actually matches that exact same class. So you can have two matches by accident and then apply it to another HTML element, and that can cause, well, of course, problems. Another thing is that it's a lot easier to detect our CSS. Easier deletion of CSS. The problem with, again, when you have a lot of matching taking place, if you delete something, it might unintentionally affect other components, and that's obviously not what we want. There's also simple dynamic styling. So sometimes you want to style things differently depending on certain events that occurred. So maybe typically you have a background color of pink, but let's say you you do some sort of action and then we want to change that background color to green. Now, we can definitely do that with React. We can dynamically change the styles. We can dynamically change the class names, but it's a lot easier with this library. And there's a lot of benefits. You can go ahead and you can read about the motivations. But I think the best thing that we can probably do is go ahead and just use this application in a typical React app. So let's go to installation. So the first thing that we need to do is we want to create a React app. And I hope if you are taking this crash course that you know how to create a React application, but I will quickly show you. Just cd into whatever directory you want to create your React app and just do npx create React app and then whatever your React app name is. So just call it my styled components app. So go ahead and create your React app. I already did. This command does take a few minutes and I don't want to wait, so I already did that. But just enter that command and then cd into that directory. And now we want to install this right over here. So npm install --save styled components. And this is basically that library. And this is what is essentially going to provide us with that, let's go back over here. Let's go back once more with this right over here, because like this is not really proper syntax, but what we can do is we can import styled and then we can do dot whatever element and then we can specify our CSS. So yeah, we can only do that with the styled components library. So go ahead and install that. And then once you have that installed, you should be able to go to your package.json, and then you should be able to see it in there. So you should be able to see it as a dev dependency, and I do. Okay, cool. So go ahead and cd into your React application and do npm start to start your React app. And that should give you an app that looks a little something like this. And it should be running on localhost 3000. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of everything inside of the app.js except for the header. So let's go ahead and let's just save that. You can see this is what we get. This is ultimately what we get. All right, cool. So now let's create a component and let's actually create it through styled CSS. So let's just create a basic box, and inside of that box, let's have an h1 that is styled as well. All right, so now let's say I want to create a box that looks something like this. So I'm going to create a box, and I want this to be of type section. I'm going to do it without the styled components for now, and then I'm going to show you how we can do it with styled components. So let's say over here I have this HTML section, and I'm going to do inline styles for now. So I want this to have, let's say I want this to have padding of 4 rems. And then I also want it to have a margin of 2 rems. And lastly, I want it to have a background color. And we're going to give this a background color of papaya whip. All right, which is a pretty cool background color. So of course we can do this, and then if we go ahead and save, let's actually just zoom in a little bit. You can see that we have our beautiful box. But you can see that this is definitely a pain. It is not very beautiful, to be honest. And again, if we extract this into our own CSS file, then we would have to create a class for this, and we could have conflicting classes. It's just not very organized. So let's actually do this right over here, but let's do it with that React or styled components library. So to do that, what we need to do is import styled from, and then we're going to say styled components. And then from here, we're going to create a component, and we're going to call this component wrapper because, well, it's a wrapper. Or we can call it section, doesn't matter. I'm going to call it wrapper. And then over here, we're going to say styled, and then we're going to specify what the HTML element is. So now we can say style.section, and then we can do our template literals over here. And then in here, we can have all of our styles. So now we can do padding, and this is normal, just CSS. So we can do padding of 4 rem, so we don't put quotes here or anything. This is just normal CSS. Then we have margin of 2 rems. And then we have background color. Again, notice this is normal CSS. This isn't React where we have camel case. So we can have of papa. I can't even pronounce that. All right, so now what we can do is we can completely get rid of this. So let me get rid of that, show you that, hey, it doesn't exist anymore. And now what we can do is we can just simply use this wrapper component. And this wrapper component is going to be completely identical to what we had before. Awesome. All right, so now let's do the same thing, and let's create a h1 tag. Again, we can create an h1 tag and have the styles in here as well, or in an external CSS file. Let's not do that. Let's create another styled component. Let's get rid of this. Okay, let's create another styled component, and we're going to call this, let's say, the title. We're going to say styled.h1. And then what we are going to do is we're going to say that, hey, this is font size of 1.5 rem. And then text align, let's put it in the center. And then lastly, let's give it a color of pale violet red. Okay, so now what we can do is in here, we can specify that title, and then we can remember, this is just going to be an h1 tag with those styles. So in here we can have, you know, whatever the title is. In our case, I'll just say that the title is Hello World. Hello World. All right, cool. So you can see it's really just that easy. So now let's move on to how we can actually create, you know, some dynamic styles depending on, let's say, some props that we pass in. So let's say what we want to do is we want to have, again, dynamic styles. So let's say, you know, the wrapper, you know, by default we want it to be this color, but let's say if we provided the prop of color, we want to change this background color to whatever it is that we want. How do we do that? For instance, let me just, again, quickly illustrate this. So right here, let's have another wrapper, and let's say we want the color, we would pass the props color, and then let's say we want this color to be red. So we can save that. Right now, again, it's the exact same color, but what we want it to be ultimately red and override this, whatever this color is. Papaya whip. Papaya whip. No idea what that. All right. So you guys know what I mean. All right. So how do we do that? Well, we can do that very easily. So over here, these are template literals. So what we can essentially do at this point is we can get rid of this and we can basically have $sign and then curly braces. This is how we can actually inject some JavaScript into these template literals. And then in here, this can take a function. And this function is basically, or a callback, and this callback is going to basically have all of the props that were passed into that component. So we can basically have that callback, and then we can return something. So what we can basically do is say, okay, if props.color exists, so if that exists, then what we want to do is we want to return props.color. But if it doesn't, then we want to return, well, we want to return papaya whip. Papaya whip. So now you can see that it's red. Again, let's kind of illustrate what's happening here. So over here, we're saying that, hey, we want the background color to be whatever this function is going to return. This function is going to basically have all of the props in there. And then we're going to say that, hey, if the props is passed in, then we want to return whatever props.color is. And so background color is going to be whatever that we pass in. If it's not, then hey, we are going to return papaya whip. One thing we can also do is just do a little bit of destructuring. So we can say color instead here. We can just destructure out color so we don't have to have the props in there. All right, cool. All right, so let's actually change that color to white. White looks a little bit better. All right, so that's how we do it with like one simple style. But let's say we want to pass in a prop, and if that prop is true, we want to apply many different styles. So let's say we want to apply a background color, a border radius, you know, all these different things. How do we go about doing that? Well, we would do that through the CSS method that is a part of styled component. So we would essentially say CSS, and then what we would do at this point is we can say, okay, let's say we want to apply some sort of box shadow, some cool like box shadow to this this box or whatever. We want to have like some kind of cool 3D effect, and we need multiple styles to do that. So what we would do here is we would say, let's say the prop is called 3D, okay? So or is 3D. So what we can basically say is we can have our function here, and notice that this function is not associated to any property. It's basically at this root level. So we can have our function, and we can say, you know, is 3D, and then we can basically say that, hey, if this is 3D, then what we can ultimately do is just return a bunch of styles. And that's where we can basically use the CSS over here. So we can say CSS, and we can have more template literals. And then what we can do is we can say, okay, well, we want, let's say, I don't know, the background color. Let's say we want to always override the background color to be yellow. Let's say we also want a box shadow of 1 rem, and then black. So this is how we can basically add multiple styles depending on a prop. So again, nothing's going to happen here, of course, because we didn't inject this. Let's go ahead and create that component. Now what we can do is let's actually leave that in there, and we can also say is 3D, and we can say that's equal to true. So now we get this really crazy CSS. So something is actually going wrong with the background color for some reason. Let's actually get rid of this. I'm a little surprised that that's happening. It's a little strange. Background color yellow. Seems like that should probably work, but for some reason, let's actually apply like another style. Let's actually apply a border. Let's apply border. We're gonna say 2 rem. Let's say solid, and let's say yellow. There we go. Okay. I'm not sure why the background color is not being applied, but like the premise is that, hey, we can actually inject multiple different styles in here. So you can see here that we have our border, and then we have our box shadow. And you can also have like maybe 2 rems here, so we can have more of a blurry effect. All right, cool. This border is hideous to look at. All right, cool. Let's say, here we go. We have a nice 3D effect, which is pretty cool. All right, so the last thing that I want to do is talk about injections and how we can basically extend styles. So let's say you want to create a wrapper that looks very, very similar to, you know, the base wrapper, except this wrapper is a circle. So essentially, it's going to have all of these kind of basic components, but again, it's going to be a circle. And we also want to, let's say, if we want to say, hey, is 3D or is whatever. We want all these basic kind of styles and dynamic styles, but we want to basically change 1 or 2 things. We can do that through another prop, but that can kind of get annoying. What we can basically do instead is we can essentially extend the styles of this component into this other component that we created. And to do that, we basically do this. So we can just say circle wrapper, and then we can say styled, and instead of a typical HTML element, we can just say we kind of invoke it, and then in here we basically say the styled component that we want to extend. And that's basically all we have to do. And then in here, we can have our template literals and then add whatever additional basically logic that we want to create. So basically, again, ultimately what's happening here is it's creating a component that looks like this that has all of these styles plus the styles that we add over here. So now we can basically say something like, I don't know, border radius, and the border radius is 100%. So now what we can do is we can say circle wrapper, and I'm just gonna put in hello in here. Just gonna put in hello. And now what we can do is, if you go scroll all the way down, you can see that we have our circle. And again, you can see that it has all of the other styles. So you can see it has the background color. It has, basically all the other styles that are applied here. And we can also, dynamically generate the styles that we have here. So again, we can change the color of this, of course, if we want to. So we can say color is, I don't know, purple. So you can see that. And we can also say is 3D. This might mess up the background for some reason, and that's only because I'm just too lazy to figure out exactly what's happening. But yeah, you can see that it applies perfectly well. All right, so that pretty much sums everything up with styled components. A very short little video. I just wanted to get a video out there, but I hopefully this explanation helped you, and you can probably use it in some of your other React applications.